The sun had barely risen over the Denver skyline when Flight 392 taxied down the runway, its engines humming with mechanical precision. The sky was painted in soft oranges and blues, and for most passengers aboard the flight to Miami, it was just another day. Some were headed for business, others for family vacations, but everyone shared the same expectation, a routine flight with no surprises. Emily Parker, a 34-year-old elementary school teacher from Boulder, had settled into her window seat in row 17 with a book in her lap and earbuds in place. She wasn't much for flying, but she wasn't afraid of it either. Planes were safer than cars, she always reminded herself. It was the same thing her father used to say back when they'd sit in the backyard watching planes draw lines across the sky. She had no idea her life was about to be completely rewritten by the sky she once feared. The first 2 hours of the flight were smooth. The flight attendants served coffee and small bags of peanuts. Passengers read magazines. Children colored in travel activity books. The captain's voice came over the intercom shortly after takeoff, casual and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 35,000 feet. Should be clear all the way to Miami, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." Emily sipped ginger ale, flipped the page, and let herself relax into the drone of the engines. Then, it happened. A sudden jolt rocked the aircraft, not violent, but unexpected. The kind that makes everyone momentarily glance up, look around, and wonder if they imagined it. Flight attendants exchanged glances. Seconds later, a loud ding rang out, followed by the squelch of the intercom again. But this time, it wasn't the pilot. A female voice, breathless and shaking, cut through the calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor or medical professional on board, please come to the cockpit immediately. We have a medical emergency with the captain." Gasps rippled through the cabin like a current. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The man next to Emily sat straighter. A young woman across the aisle pressed her hand to her mouth. People instinctively began scanning the rows for someone to stand. A middle-aged woman near the front, a nurse, hurried down the aisle. A few rows behind her, a man in a jacket followed, saying he was a paramedic. Emily felt her stomach twist. Something was wrong. Very wrong. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The paramedic returned alone, his face pale. Another ding. The same woman's voice again, shakier now. "This is your first officer speaking. The captain is unconscious. We're attempting to assess the situation. Please remain calm." The murmur became a buzz. Some people stood up, despite being told to stay seated. Babies began crying. A flight attendant moved quickly to reassure people, but the anxiety in her eyes betrayed her rehearsed calm. Emily sat frozen, hands clenched around her paperback. Thoughts raced. How does a plane land without its captain? Is the co-pilot trained? Enough? Is this the kind of thing that ends in a crash? Then came the plea that changed everything. If anyone on board has flight experience, please come to the front of the plane immediately. For a long moment, no one moved. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. She hadn't touched a yoke in over a decade. Hadn't been inside a cockpit since walking away from flight school after her father's sudden death. She'd nearly earned her private pilot license but life had taken over. Teaching, bills, grief. She let the dream go. But now? Now, 130 lives were in limbo, suspended over the earth in a metal tube. With one pilot down, and another who didn't believe he could land. It alone. Her seatbelt clicked open. She stood slowly. The aisle stretched in. Front of her like a runway. Emily cleared her throat, barely audible. I have training." The co-pilot turned to look at her as she reached the cockpit door. His eyes were tired, scared, searching. "You?" he asked. She nodded. "Private pilot training. I didn't finish." But I remember a lot. He hesitated, but they had no one else. He opened the cockpit door and gestured for her to enter. And just like that, the woman who boarded as a passenger stepped into a pilot's seat staring down at thousands of blinking lights, a dead captain beside her, and a sky full of terrifying possibilities. Emily stepped into the cockpit, a place once familiar, now terrifying. The hum of electronics, the beeping alerts, the flashing screens. It was overwhelming. Her eyes darted from panel to panel. The co-pilot, a man in his late 30s named First Officer Daniels, motioned toward the captain's seat. "Sit here," he said. "We're in cruise mode, but the autopilot's acting up. And I can't do this alone." Emily lowered herself into the seat, her hands trembling. The body of Captain Hughes was slumped against the side wall, unconscious but breathing. An oxygen mask had been strapped over his face. Emily's heart sank seeing him like that, a reminder that this wasn't a simulation. This was real, terrifyingly real. "I'm not qualified for this," she murmured, half to herself. Daniels looked at her. "Neither am I to do it alone." She nodded. "Okay, tell me what you need." He gave a quick overview of their situation. Flight 392 was cruising at 35,000 feet. The autopilot had been set, but was glitching. Weather was building over the southeast, and they were about 90 minutes from Miami. But Daniels didn't trust himself to land solo. He was only certified for first officer duties, not captain responsibilities, especially not in emergencies. "I haven't flown anything in over a decade," Emily confessed. Daniels exhaled. "It's either you or we go down with our fingers crossed." The intercom crackled again. Air traffic control's voice filled the cabin. "Flight 392, do you copy? We're hearing unconfirmed reports of a medical emergency. Please confirm your flight status." Daniels picked up the radio and responded, his voice cracking slightly. "Control, this is First Officer Daniels. We have a medical emergency. Our captain is unconscious. I have a passenger with prior flight training assisting." "Copy that, 392, the controller replied. "We're notifying FAA emergency support. Stand by for instructions." "What's your fuel level?" Daniels checked and responded. They had enough to reroute if needed. Emily took a deep breath and reached out for the control yoke in front of her. It felt cold, stiff. A wave of memories flooded back her first solo flight, practicing touch-and-go landings, learning how to handle stall recovery. That life felt like another century. Another Emily. "You said you trained?" Daniels asked, trying to steady himself. "Almost finished. Private license." "Cessna 172s, she replied. "Okay, well, this is a Boeing 737. "Yeah," she said. Voice tight, I noticed. Despite the tension, that single dry remark cracked the ice between them. Daniel smiled grimly. "You're not panicking. That's something." "Not yet." Air traffic control came back on the radio. "Flight 392. We're patching in Captain James Ross, retired Boeing instructor. He'll assist you with step-by-step instructions. Be advised, your closest viable airport is now Atlanta. Weather's building over Florida. Do you copy?" Daniels looked at Emily. She nodded. "Copy," he said, standing by for Ross. New voice joined the channel. Deep, calm, with a quiet authority. "This is Captain Ross. Who am I speaking with in command?" Daniels replied, "First Officer Daniels. And assisting me is Emily Parker," she said into the mic. "Private pilot, not current, not licensed for commercial aircraft." "Understood, Emily," Ross said. "We're going to take this 1 minute at a time. Can you confirm current heading and altitude?" Emily and Daniels worked together, checking instruments. She remembered the basics: heading indicator, altimeter, airspeed, vertical speed. Bigger plane, same principles. Ross guided them through basic system checks. Emily slowly became more comfortable calling out instrument readings, responding with confidence she didn't know she still had. She felt rusty, but she wasn't lost. Meanwhile, the cabin behind them buzzed with silent tension. Passengers whispered, cried, clutched hands. None of them knew that the woman now flying the plane was a schoolteacher from Colorado with no commercial experience. They only knew they were still in the sky, and that someone was trying to bring them down safely. "Emily," Ross said gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but you're doing well. This aircraft flies like a truck, but once you get it stable, it's obedient. Just follow my lead." Emily took a breath. The numbers on the panel started to make more sense. Her confidence ticked up just a little. "I'm ready," she said, eyes fixed on the horizon out the windshield. "Good," said Ross. "Then let's get you home." The aircraft banked slightly as they corrected course. Clouds began forming ahead. Below them, the vast sprawl of America stretched in silence. And in the cockpit, a woman who had walked away from flight years ago now held the lives of 130 people in her hands. The rain began to splatter against the windshield in soft, erratic rhythms as Flight 392 approached the edge of a storm system. From the cockpit, the clouds looked heavy, almost bruised, like a warning painted across the sky. Emily kept her focus, locked on the instruments, but a part of her couldn't help noticing the surreal beauty outside, a beauty hiding danger. Captain Ross's voice came through the headset, steady as ever. "Emily, you're doing great. We're rerouting you to Atlanta. It's a larger runway, and they're clearing other flights for your emergency priority landing." Daniels nodded. "Fuel's fine for that. We've got just over 40 minutes. Emily adjusted the heading with shaking fingers. The aircraft responded with a smooth bank. For a second, it felt like she knew what she was doing. Daniels checked the weather radar. "Storm's moving faster than forecast. If it shifts east, we might lose that window." "Let's not lose it," Emily muttered, jaw tight. Ross guided them step by step through the flight management system. Emily followed, her instincts sharpening. Her long dormant training began to kick in, not fully, but enough. Every instruction Ross gave was precise and clear. It gave her something solid to grip in the chaos. Back in the cabin, tension hung thick. Flight attendants moved quickly but quietly, whispering instructions, gathering emergency equipment. A woman quietly cried into her partner's shoulder. A teenager clutched a rosary. Parents held their children closer. No one knew that the voice currently helping fly the aircraft belonged to a woman who, just hours ago, hadn't thought about flying in years. They only knew that the plane was still in the sky, and they were still alive. Inside the cockpit, Emily was beginning to feel the pressure. "What happens if the weather closes in before we reach Atlanta?" she asked Ross. "We have a secondary option, Birmingham, but the runway's shorter and wind is stronger," Ross answered. "Atlanta is your best bet. Then we stay." "On course," she replied, more firmly this time. Daniels glanced sideways at her. "You're holding it together better than a lot of pilots I've flown with." She let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "I'm a school teacher. Try managing 25 third graders. This is slightly less chaotic." A brief moment of levity. It helped. Then a warning light blinked on. Daniels frowned. Autopilot disengaging again. The plane gave a slight dip. Emily instinctively pulled back slightly on the yoke, correcting it. "Manual control confirmed," Ross said over the comms. "Maintain altitude at 33,000 feet. Keep nose level." Emily tightened her grip. "I've got it." "You do," Ross replied. Every bump in the sky now felt amplified. The plane responded to her every touch, sluggish but obedient. It was like steering a bus on ice, but she adjusted little by little. Her confidence was still fragile, but growing as they neared Atlanta airspace. The air traffic control tower chimed in. Flight 392, you are clear for priority landing on runway 27 left. Winds are light. Visibility at 6 miles. Daniels gave a thumbs up. We're being watched. Ross guided Emily through the pre-landing checklist. Gear will come down at 5 miles out. You'll begin your descent in approximately 15 minutes. Emily nodded, then remembered to respond verbally. Copy. Behind her calm tone, she was sweating. Her shirt clung to her back. Every nerve screamed with pressure, but she pushed it down. Focus. Just like she used to in training. Ross, what happens if I come in too fast? She asked. You won't, but if you do, go around and try again. You've got fuel for one more loop. We'll walk you through every inch of it. She exhaled. Okay, I trust you. The clouds below started to thin, giving her glimpses of city lights as Atlanta came into view. The runway was still distant, but visible. It glowed like a thread of hope stretched across the night. Daniels leaned over. You ready? No, she said honestly, then added, but I'm going anyway. Ross's voice softened. You were meant for this, Emily. Let the plane come to you. Don't force it. Emily gripped the yoke tighter, aligning the nose. The plane felt different, now less like a threat, more like a test. And somewhere deep inside, her long-forgotten love of flying stirred as the wheels of fate spun faster. One truth settled in her heart. She hadn't chosen this moment, but maybe the sky had chosen her. Asterisk, the tower's calm voice crackled again. Flight 392, descend to 28,000 feet. Begin approach for runway 27 left. Emily adjusted the vertical speed and eased the yoke gently forward. The aircraft responded with a deep hum, beginning its slow descent toward Atlanta. A long breath escaped her lungs, but the tension in her body didn't leave. Clouds swirled. Beneath them, lit from below by flashes of distant lightning. Though they had avoided the worst of the storm, turbulence tossed the plane lightly as it sliced through wet air. Emily tightened her grip. The aircraft, now fully under her control, felt heavier, more alive than anything she'd flown before. Captain Ross came through the headset. Doing fine, Emily. Stay smooth. Let the descent come to you. She nodded, wiping sweat from her temple. Feels like riding a whale through a thunderstorm. Daniels chuckled, the sound dry and nervous. You're the calmest amateur I've ever seen. Emily shot him a side glance. Don't mistake calm for terrified silence. Below them, the lights of Atlanta peeked through scattered clouds, distant but growing. Emergency vehicles were already lined up on the runway, flashing. Red and white lights blinked like distant stars. The airport had cleared the airspace completely for Flight 392. Every controller, firefighter, paramedic, and even local news crews were watching. Ross guided her through flap settings and airspeed control. Lower flaps to 10 degrees? Good. You'll need full flaps at 3 miles. Copy, she replied. The cockpit no longer felt alien. It still terrified her, but her body was remembering things her mind had long buried. Her fingers knew how to feel for trim. Her eyes instinctively bounced between airspeed, altitude, and glide path. The radio chatter had faded into background rhythm. She wasn't just reacting now. She was flying. Daniels adjusted the autopilot panel, but it flickered and disengaged again. Still unreliable, he muttered. Manual all. The way in. Emily gave a grim nod. Then we do it the old-fashioned way. Ross's voice stayed steady. You've got 30 miles to the runway. Gear will go down at 10. Let's run the landing checklist. As Ross walked them through each step flaps, speed brakes, Emily responded calmly. One by one, the instruments made sense. Hey. Weight of what she was doing didn't disappear, but it became something manageable, like flying through fear instead of freezing inside it. The sky grew darker as they descended through a thick patch of cloud. Rain streaked the windshield. Emily leaned forward, straining to see the ground. "We're almost through," Ross said gently. "Don't worry, runway will appear." Then the plane jolted, harder this time. Daniels gripped the throttle. Turbulence. "Just a bump, stay with it." Emily's breath hitched. For a moment, she was back in her dad's Cessna, age 19, learning to manage a crosswind landing. He used to say, "The wind's not your enemy. It just wants to know if you respect it." She steadied the yoke, gently correcting their angle. Ross came in again. That's it. Good instincts. The clouds thinned again, and there it was, runway lights shining like a beacon. The airport stretched out ahead, long and straight. Daniels exhaled. "We've got the field in sight." The approach was real now. They were 5 minutes from touchdown. "Emily," Ross said, "at 1,000 feet, you'll be on final. Start slowing to 140 knots. Drop gear now." Emily reached for the landing gear lever. Her hand hovered for just a second, then she pulled it. Soft thunk echoed through the plane. 3 green lights appeared on the panel. Gear down and locked. Daniels confirmed that the tower radioed again. "Flight 392, you are clear to land. Winds calm. Runway 27 left. Emergency crews standing by." "Copy," Daniels replied. Final approach confirmed. Ross's voice was lower now, more intimate, more focused. "Emily, you've done everything right. Let the aircraft descend. Don't fight it. Keep your nose on the numbers. Flare at 10 feet. You've got this." She nodded silently. The runway filled the windshield. It was real now, concrete and paint, not just a blinking light. She eased back slightly, guiding the massive plane down. For a brief second, silence took over. Not fear, not panic, not just silence. Her hands were steady. Her breath calmed. She was no longer a schoolteacher. She was a pilot. The aircraft roared through the final approach path, nose steady, wings level. The lights of runway 27 left grew larger in the windshield, glowing like a landing strip to salvation. Inside the cockpit, Emily Parker's heartbeat pounded, like a drum in her ears, but her hands remained still on the yoke. Her breathing was deep, deliberate, controlled. Speed 140 knots. "Glide slope perfect," Daniels called, eyes flicking between instruments. Ross's calm voice guided her from the headset. "You're right where you need to be. Don't chase the runway, let it come to you." Emily tightened her grip. Every movement mattered now. The Boeing 737 responded slowly but obediently. A heavy beast that wanted to land, but would punish overcorrection. She held it steady, eyes flicking between the numbers on the altimeter and the streak of lights ahead. At 500 feet, turbulence nudged the aircraft. A sudden dip made the passengers gasp. One child shrieked. The plane jolted, but Emily countered smoothly, drawing it back on course. Daniels glanced at her, impressed. "You sure you're not licensed to fly this thing?" He muttered. "I'm sure," she replied, lips tight. "But I'm also sure I don't want to die today." The truth was, fear still clawed at her chest. Her legs were tense, shoulders aching from holding position. But she'd been terrified before, on her first solo flight and during the funeral. When her father's voice vanished forever from the world. She survived both. She would survive this. Ross's voice returned. 200 feet. Flare at 10. "You're doing beautifully, Emily. Breathe." The runway rushed up to meet them. Emily eased back slightly on the yoke. The nose lifted just a touch. She could hear every passenger behind her, holding their breath, feel their hopes. Pressing forward like weight in the air, Daniels called out, 50 feet, 30, 20. Now, Ross said gently. Emily flared. The main wheels struck the tarmac with a hard thud, then bounced. Her stomach dropped. The nose dipped forward too much. She instinctively pulled back again, flaring slightly. The plane bounced a second. Time then finally kissed the runway and stayed. Throttle to idle, Ross said. Deploy spoilers. She moved the lever. The panels along the wings lifted with a mechanical scream. Daniels reached for the reverse thrusters. Reverse engaged. The engines roared in reverse, pushing against their momentum. The aircraft shuddered, tires screeching across wet asphalt. Outside, fire trucks and ambulances lined the taxiway, lights flashing. Inside the cabin, the silence was unbearable. Then finally, the plane slowed. The nose dipped slightly as brakes were applied, and the plane came to a full stop. Complete. Total stillness. For 2 seconds, no one moved. Not a breath. Not a sound. Then an explosion of applause. Screams of joy. People cried, laughed, shouted. Passengers clapped so loudly, it echoed through the fuselage. A woman yelled, "We're alive." Someone started sobbing. Another voice cried, "She did it. She really landed it." Emily leaned back in her seat, trembling. Her muscles felt like rubber. Her hands slipped from the yoke, drenched in sweat. Daniels removed his headset and simply stared at her in awe. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. She gave a shaky smile. "Say or on the ground." Ross's voice came one last time over the headset. "Emily, from one pilot to another, welcome back." That made her cry. She couldn't help it. Just silent tears slipping down her face as the adrenaline finally let go. Airport ground crews rushed the cockpit. Paramedics boarded, lifting the unconscious captain onto a stretcher. He was breathing, still unconscious, but alive. A flight attendant peeked into the cockpit. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "Is she ... Is she the one who flew us down?" Daniels pointed to Emily. She landed it. The attendant's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." In the aisle, passengers had already started chanting, "Pilot, pilot, pilot." Emily covered her face, laughing and crying all at once. Outside, rain fell lightly as emergency teams surrounded the plane. The worst was over. But inside Emily, something had awakened, something she thought she'd lost forever. She hadn't just saved 130 lives. She'd found her wings again. The aircraft rested motionless at the end of runway 27 left, rain streaking across the cockpit glass in thin lines. Emily sat still, hands folded in her lap now, unsure what to do with them. Her entire body buzzed with tension, her knees weak, her arms heavy, her chest still rising and falling with each breath, as if she'd just finished a marathon. Outside, blue and red emergency lights flashed in rhythm. Medics rolled a stretcher past her window. The captain strapped in, oxygen mask still pressed to his face. He was alive, stable, unresponsive. But he hadn't died. That counted. Inside, applause still echoed from the cabin behind her. Some passengers were still clapping. Others were calling loved ones, sobbing into their phones. One woman walked down the aisle and shouted toward the cockpit, "God bless you. Whoever you are, you saved us all." Emily looked down at her shaking hands and whispered to herself, "I can't believe that just happened." First Officer Daniels placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Believe it, you were the pilot today." She laughed softly through a tear. "I didn't land that plane alone." "No," he agreed. "But you were the reason we're all walking away from it." The cabin door opened and uniformed paramedics entered. They quickly debriefed Daniels and escorted Captain Hughes out of the cockpit. More emergency personnel stepped in, asking questions, checking vitals, and confirming everyone's safety. Then came security officers, who gently pulled Emily aside. "We need to debrief you, ma'am," one said politely. "Standard protocol. We just want to know how you managed to land the aircraft." Emily nodded, still dazed. "Of course." They led her off the plane through a separate stairway, away from the rest of the passengers, most of whom were still applauding as she walked by. One elderly woman reached out and touched Emily's hand as she passed. "You were an angel," she whispered. Emily couldn't speak. She simply smiled and kept walking. A private airport vehicle picked her up and took her across the runway to a small room inside the terminal. There, she was met by airline representatives, FAA officials, and a few members of airport security. For the next hour, she recounted everything: how she'd once trained as a private pilot, how she hadn't flown in over 10 years, how she simply reacted when the call went out. "I just did what I remembered," she said quietly. "And I listened." "You did more than listen," said one FIA supervisor, looking up from his notepad. "You brought in a 737 during light turbulence in the rain, with a failing autopilot and zero prior experience on commercial aircraft. That's extraordinary." She shrugged, unsure how to respond. She didn't feel extraordinary. She felt exhausted. Another man entered the room. It was Captain James Ross, the retired instructor who had guided her via radio. Emily stood immediately. "Captain Ross?" he smiled warmly. "Emily Parker." They shook hands, and he pulled her into a hug before she could even react. "You did what most seasoned pilots hope they can do in a moment like that. You kept calm. You made decisions. You landed that plane. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe." Emily smiled through her tears. "Thank you for staying with me." He nodded. "You've still got the soul of a pilot. I could hear it in your voice." A knock came on the door. A younger woman stepped in, an airline media liaison. "Emily, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the press already knows. Your name's out. Passengers are calling you a hero. News outlets are requesting statements. CNN, NBC, even the FAA has received interview requests." Emily's eyes widened. "I'm just a school teacher. I didn't do this for attention." "I know," the woman said gently. "But right now, the world wants to hear from you." Ross placed a hand on her back. "Take your time. But when you're ready, we've got opportunities if you want them. Retraining, scholarships, airline interviews, you name it." Emily stared out the window. Thunder still rolled in the distance. But inside her, the storm was clearing. She had faced death at 35,000 feet. She had taken control, not just of the aircraft, but of her own life again. She had been a passenger for far too long. And now, finally, she had landed. 3 days later, Emily Parker sat on a quiet park bench in Boulder, Colorado, watching clouds drift across the July sky. They looked nothing like the storm-filled ones she'd flown through days before. These were peaceful, drifting without purpose or pressure. In her lap was a cup of coffee growing cold, forgotten in her hands. She hadn't been home even 72 hours, and her life had already changed beyond anything she could have imagined. News vans had followed her to the airport. Camera crews stood outside. Her hotel. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests and thank you letters from strangers. Hashtags like #HeroTeacherPilot and #Emily Parker Saved Us were trending on every platform. Some called her the miracle woman of Flight 392. Others were already asking about movie rights. But Emily didn't feel like a hero. She felt displaced, like her body had landed. But her mind was still 35,000 feet up. The doorbell hadn't stopped ringing since she returned home. Neighbors, reporters, former students, even her old flight instructor had shown up. They all wanted to talk, to thank her, to celebrate her. But Emily hadn't even unpacked her suitcase. She needed quiet. She needed air. She needed to process what had really happened. On the bench, she scrolled through her phone photos of the landing, video clips from passengers crying in relief, a selfie someone had taken just moments after the plane touched. Down with her blurred in the background, looking shocked and tearful. She remembered every second of it. Every jolt, every voice over the radio, every breath she'd taken while praying she didn't make a mistake. How had she gone from forgotten flight student to international headline? A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Miss Parker? She turned to see a teenage girl, maybe 15, standing nervously with a small notepad and pen. I'm sorry to bother you. Are you the one who landed that plane? Emily hesitated. She still wasn't used to answering that. Yes, she said, quietly. That was me. The girl smiled wide. My mom was on that flight. She's still crying about it. She told me you were the bravest person she's ever met. Emily's chest tightened. I didn't feel brave. But you were, the girl sighed. She says she thought she was going to die. And then you came forward. You weren't even supposed to be there. No, Emily said softly. I wasn't. Do you think? Do you think maybe I could get your autograph? The girl asked, holding out her notepad. Emily blinked. She was a school teacher. No one had ever asked her for an autograph. She hesitated a moment, then smiled and signed. To Sarah, you're braver than you know. Emily Parker. The girl beamed. Thank you. I want to be a pilot one day, too. Emily's smile faded only slightly. That old ache returned. The ache of something lost, long ago, of dreams she had set aside because she thought they'd slipped out of reach. After the girl left, Emily sat there quietly, thinking about all the moments that had led to that cockpit. Her father's encouragement. Her decision to quit flight school, the years spent wondering if she'd made a mistake. Maybe it hadn't been a mistake. Maybe it was just waiting. Her phone buzzed. A message from Captain Ross. You ready to come back up here? I've got a simulator session at United in Denver this weekend. Just you and me. No pressure. Just flying. Let me know. Emily stared at the message. Another buzz followed. This one from the FAA, offering a formal sponsorship for her to complete. Commercial pilot certification, with full training and fast-track approvals, due to demonstrated emergency competence and proven aptitude. She looked back at the sky. It wasn't calling to her this time. It was welcoming her back. Asterisk. The hangar doors rolled open with a mechanical groan, revealing a sleek simulator cockpit parked on a rotating platform. Inside, everything felt exactly like the real thing. The same instrument panel, the same seat, the same yoke that had once felt so unfamiliar in Emily Parker's hands. This time, she stepped into it without trembling. Captain Ross stood beside her, holding a clipboard. You're the one flying today, he said with a warm grin. No emergencies, no unconscious pilots. Just you and the sky, virtual sky. Emily smiled as she sat in the left seat. That's a welcome change. It had been 2 weeks since the landing. The news cycle had finally slowed down, and the world had moved on to the next headline. But not Emily. She was still living in the ripple effect of that, moment to moment, that had dragged her out of obscurity and shoved her straight into her calling. Her phone still buzzed with job offers. Commercial pilot academies offered free training. Airline recruiters sent emails filled with promise and prestige. Even NASA had reached out with a curious inquiry, but Emily wasn't rushing into anything. She wanted to be sure this wasn't just adrenaline, that what she felt in the cockpit was still real, still hers. Not just a fluke, not just a lucky landing. Ross settled into the co-pilot's seat. Let's take her up. Clear skies today. Emily powered on the simulator. Switches flipped. Systems lit up. Her fingers moved across the panels with growing confidence. Altitude 3,000 feet. Heading 090, Ross instructed. She repeated it, dialing in the numbers. The moment the simulator launched into motion, her body responded instinctively. The vibration, the sound of engines spooling every detail pulled her back into that cockpit over Georgia. But this time, she wasn't afraid. Takeoff was smooth. The simulated sky expanded around her. She banked left, leveled out, and adjusted the throttle with ease. Ross observed quietly, barely needing to say a word. "You were born for this," he finally said. Emily smiled. "I just forgot for a while." After the session, they walked out onto the tarmac, where a real 737 sat gleaming in the sun. It wasn't her plane, not yet, but looking at it stirred something deep inside her. The same something that had whispered to her as a little girl watching planes overhead with her dad. The same something that had screamed when she left flight school, and had finally roared back to life on Flight 392. Later that week, she returned to her classroom for one final day. The walls were lined with cards, drawings, and paper airplanes made by her students. One read, "Our teacher can fly a jet." Another said, "Thank you for coming back to Earth safely." She stood at the front of the room, heart full. "Today is my last day as your teacher," she said gently. "But I'll always be cheering for each of you from above, literally." One child raised his hand. "Are you going to be a pilot now?" She smiled. "Yes, I think I already am." Applause erupted, small and innocent, and it touched her deeper than any media coverage ever had. Weeks later, she officially enrolled in a fast-track commercial pilot program, her training sponsored by the FIA and United Airlines. The classroom felt different. Now it wasn't a memory. It was her future. She worked harder than ever. Days turned into nights in simulators, classrooms, and real flight time. She aced every test. Her instructors were astonished by her composure and quick learning. "There's no substitute for flying under fire," one said. "You've already done what most of us only train for." The day she earned her commercial pilot wings, she stood in front of the hangar again, this time in uniform, her name embroidered in gold over her heart. A small crowd had gathered: family, friends, passengers from Flight 392, and even Captain Ross. One by one they hugged her, congratulated her, thanked her again. But Emily wasn't the same person who boarded that plane weeks ago. She wasn't running anymore. Not from her past, her fears, or the skies. She was ready. She was home. And this time, when she stepped into the cockpit, it wasn't out of desperation. It was by choice. The end.